Hello, Sam Rogers here for the Digital Learning Asset Framework. We're talking about principles, and we're on number 4 of 5. So if you've not yet seen 1 or 2 or 3, please go do so. Watch those videos, come back. This is number 4, the impermanent asset. So we're actually finally looking at asset management. How do we treat these digital learning assets? The validity and relevance of digital learning assets degrade over time, as both the underlying information and the target group itself are dynamic and ever-changing. So what this is about is there's a tendency to think of the things that we create as if they are permanent, but none of them are. So the concepts, the skills, and the facts that we are creating digital learning assets to address, that information changes over time. How do I convert a lead in my sales process? A very different answer this year than it was probably 5 years ago in your organization or 10 years ago. Whatever assets we've developed that show that process, that are hard and fast facts at the time, erode over time, and the skill of making that conversion has to change. So our assets must change. But also, if we're developing a training for a target group of, say, new salespeople, there's a fresh supply of new salespeople all the time. And the people that we are developing that asset for, the new salespeople, that's a different set of people this year than it is last year or the year before. The group itself is changing, and it's important to design assets that stay relevant to the target group. I'd like to say too, just for a minute, that there are a couple different components to the one-page reference that is the Digital Learning Asset Framework version 1.0. There's the definition, there's the 5 core principles, there's the framework structure, and over on the right-hand side of that document, there's a list of suggested metadata as well. Now, it's not a requirement that you use every field in the metadata, but it's there for a reason. It's there to help with asset management stemming from this principle. So let's look at a strategy. This is just an example. All content is created to fill a specific knowledge gap for a specific target audience, and it's managed by a specific entity who governs, maintains, and audits its use, as well as its relevance to the target audience. Now, I realize this may not be true in every organization, and this strategy is not one that you need to employ to be using the Digital Learning Asset Framework. I just provide it as an example of a good use of the Digital Learning Asset Framework. If you have content, there is some life cycle to it. There's some point at which it's not going to be relevant to the audience anymore for whatever reason. So what is, say, a tactic that we could execute against that? Well, we could document elements about that asset, the metadata I was mentioning. Every digital learning asset is now accompanied with a standardized data set, which is populated and maintained to facilitate the administration of that asset. So when we make an asset, we make it for a very specific purpose. There's a target audience and a knowledge gap that we are creating that asset to fill for that audience. And that's not to say that that asset wouldn't be useful to other audiences. And how do we know when to change it anyway? Well, we know when we document things like the intent, that target audience, who wants to review a 1-hour video or click all the way through a game experience or go into VR again to be able to determine if this asset needs to be updated and changed. We can document that as we create the asset when that project is undergoing. And then as it goes through a maintenance cycle, then when we're starting to measure it, we know what we're measuring against, and we know how to maintain it better. So a tool that we could use for better maintenance is learner feedback, actually closing the gap between the people creating the content, administering the content, and receiving this content. We can create capture mechanisms that we make available to the target audience to provide feedback about the validity and the relevance of assets. Such important things as, hey, this broke. It didn't work for me. We can also employ techniques then with that feedback, once we've got that tool to be able to gather it, to route that back to, say, an administrator, someone who can receive this input from the learners and actually check and say, oh, this is working for these learners, but it's not working for these learners. There's the new Edge browser is not playing our SCORM 1.2 compliant packages that IE does just fine. It's really good to be able to route this back, and that's one example of a technique that's executing against a tool and rolling up to a tactic that is deployed against our strategy for content administration, supporting the principle of the impermanent asset. This is just one example, and tomorrow we will look at Principle 5, the learning value, being able to actually link all that we're tracking back to something that the business can care about, back to a value that actually makes sense for the knowledge gap that we're closing and how to quantify that. Hope that you'll be back then. Please leave any comments that you like on this video. Questions are welcome. This gets stronger, this gets better with your participation. So please do leave comments and feel free to share this out. I look forward to talking to you tomorrow. Thanks.